it's not working, and I don't know why.
Okay.
Would you go get the office person? I did everything in.
Well, let's see. The projector's not on for some reason. Are there any questions? Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Where are you from?
Well, don't run me out of here, but I'm not from Texas. But I got here as soon as I could. Actually, I grew up in Alabama, so it would be the first time that somebody from the South came to Texas, to fight for the state here, through Colorado. So, the one reason why what you have here is special is because intelligence is a team sport. We want lots of sensors. Tonight I'm specifically going to be talking about emergency preparedness and community security. And we're going to go over some case studies about some riots and natural disasters. And what we really, I guess probably the starting point for all this is understand that the more sensors we have, the more information we have coming in. And the more information we have coming in, the better we as intelligence analysts, which by the way, if you're attending this talk, you may be an intelligence analyst during the next emergency for yourself. So the more information we have coming in, the better intelligence we can produce. This is like playing chess against an opponent. And you can't see the opponent's chess pieces, but he can see yours. This is what no information or no intelligence looks like when we're trying to win a conflict in Afghanistan or when we're trying to prevent looting or bring some kind of stability or security to our own area. Okay, great. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with the talk tonight. Fred said I can talk as long as I want, so if you help Uber Eats, go ahead and order breakfast. No, just kidding, order lunch. All right, so we're going to breeze through a lot of this stuff tonight, but really I think what we really need to focus on probably is intelligence gathering and the area study, and since we are a little bit limited on time, we'll breeze through some of this stuff. So I was an intelligence analyst. I got out of the Army as a sergeant, spent 3 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's kind of odd because a lot of the same indicators of insurgency that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan are now happening here in the United States. And I do think we have it's referred to as a phase 1 insurgency. Phase 1 of insurgency is the latent and incipient phase. We won't go into too much detail here, but it's very concerning. And my feet are very firmly on the ground, and I'm not really one to produce like clickbait articles or anything like that. If I'm concerned, I think everyone should be concerned. I run a company called Fort Observer. We track a lot of these leftist groups in Portland, Seattle, really all across the country. And then we also have the Fox Intelligence Group, which is our training company. All right, so we can use intelligence for the tactical environment. So tornadoes, floods, other natural disasters that may happen around here. Obviously, riots, civil unrest has been a very big topic. A couple of years ago, I was listening to a police scanner, actually up here in Dallas. And I live in Austin, by the way, so right up here, it's Dallas. And yeah, no, I feel you. Thank you. And I was listening to the police scanner, and the person who was doing dispatch came on the radio and said, there's a black Jeep driving around some neighborhood, and they're looting homes. They're driving around to these homes that have been destroyed by a tornado, and they're going through there and they're picking stuff up out of the yard, whatever may be of value, they're throwing into this Jeep and they're going to the next spot. And I just remember, man, if I lived in Dallas, I would want to tell my community, I would want to tell all my neighbors immediately, look out for this black Jeep, and let's stop these guys, whoever they are. And so when I talk about sensors and community members on board in a neighborhood watch or a community security team or whatever other type of group you have, maybe a preparedness group, That's what I'm talking about. People, eyes, ears, because as an individual, I can only see and hear things so far. But all of a sudden, I start adding other nodes to this network, and we're all sharing information. And all of a sudden, our ability to understand what's going on is multiplied exponentially. And if this were bad enough, I have some very bad news. In the 1970s, there's a guy named Sir John Boogaloo. He was a British intelligence officer. He fought in World War I. Then he worked with the Iraqi government when it was controlled or occupied by the British. And in 1972 or so, maybe 76, 77, he wrote a book called The Fate of Empires. And he does have Sir in his name. He was knighted by the British monarchy. So this is not some rando we're talking about here, in other words. Fate of Empires is all about the lifespan of empires. And I know you can't see this, but he goes through the Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, and he breaks up the Roman Republic and Pax Romana, which lasted about 200 years. And we get to the end of this long list, and it's like the average age of the empire, of all historical empires, is about 250 years. The Assyrians fought with bows and arrows. The Brits fought with ships and artillery and fighter planes and bombers. And their empire lasted about 250 years. Well, we can do some simple math. We want to start the American Empire in 1776. Maybe as late as the 1820s with the Monroe Doctrine, when we really began to expand. We could be looking at the end of the American Empire sometime between 2026 and 2070. I never want to make strong conclusions off a single indicator, but once I read this book, Glove, by the way, this was published in the 70s, he makes a pretty darn convincing case that the age of an empire is about 10 generations. And with the United States being, 244 years old roughly, out of 250 years. It's very, very interesting to me. And then the second thing is, this is actually produced by J.P. Morgan. And their research led them to find that since the 1400s, the lifespan of the world reserve currency is somewhere between 80 and 110 years. Well, right now, the United States dollar is the world reserve currency. It has a lifespan. So we could be, if we're using history as an indicator of the future, we could be looking at the United States dollar being replaced as a world reserve currency somewhere between 2024 and 2044. Bretton Woods in 1944, if we date the beginning of U.S. Dominance of the dollar in 44, or maybe up to 50. So in the not too distant future. And this is what I call the strategic environment. And these are just two indicators. There's probably a couple dozen. So unfortunately, we have this tactical stuff, the immediate stuff that's going to affect us. We've got some stuff in the not too distant future that we're also going to be butting up against as well. Some very important strategic trends. Before we move on to some other things, I want to talk about this doctrine called low-intensity conflict. Low-intensity conflict is an Army doctrine that it defines as war below the threshold of conventional war, but above the threshold of peaceful competition. So we're not in this country. According to the Army's own doctrine, we are in a low-intensity conflict. We're not in a conventional war. I don't think anyone can say that the United States is at peace right now. And I want to very, very briefly go through some of this. So, protracted struggles for competing principles and ideologies. By the way, these are some kind of sub-definitions or indicators of low-intensity conflict according to the Army. Low-intensity conflict ranges from subversion to the use of armed force. We've seen a lot of subversion, not much armed force yet. Political, economic, informational, and military instruments of war or conflict. And low-intensity conflicts are often localized, but contain regional and global security implications. Central Nebraska right now is not locked in a war with insurgents. But who is the Pacific Northwest, especially? Some cities here in Texas have a pretty strong contingent of far-left activists who are pursuing this type of conflict. It's primarily not violent. It's what we call parallel war. essentially. I'm just going to read through these. Political warfare. You look at how voting patterns are changing, especially if you're in Texas. That is indirect war, essentially. Right here in Texas, there's economic warfare. One interesting thing that's happening is economic dislocation, where people are getting fired from their jobs, or CEOs being forced to step down because they donated money to the wrong candidate, or they believe in the wrong things, especially in tech, rather than Austin. There's a very small underground of conservatives in big tech, and with Facebook and Google and Amazon in Austin, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. It's just a place where we really can't compete ideologically, not right now. Information warfare, and some very, very limited political violence. Of course, depending on what happens in November, it's a pretty good case for organized political violence happening regardless of the outcome. By the way, there are 3 outcomes. Trump wins, Biden wins, maybe nobody wins. And then we go back to the dollar as the world reserve currency and globe state of empires, and it's like, well, if we really have to contest an election, how quickly will that accelerate those timelines? And my wife would call me a pessimist. I prefer to say I'm a realist. But that is concerning. All right, so you are here, low intensity conflict, low conventional war, above peaceful competition is what's happening right now. This is a map that my company, Ford Observer, produced earlier this month on August the 3rd. We write a daily report, and this map came out. These big red diamonds are places where armed leftist groups are active. These small orange diamonds are places where there are smaller groups and they're trying to get off the ground, they're recruiting. And we know this because we consume a lot of their information and online communications. And we may be missing, we are probably missing a few spots. But in general, this is the state of the nation right now as far as a proto-insurgency or early stage insurgency is concerned. And by the way, I don't mean that we're going to turn into Iraq or Afghanistan with roadside bombs anytime soon. But it is concerning because essentially what we're looking at is a power vacuum. And we can study all throughout history. I'm a history buff, I love reading history. And places, the outcome for nations that experience power vacuums is not typically pleasant. We'll just say that. All right, so let's talk about intelligence. What intelligence can do for us? We have all this bad stuff that might happen in the future. Well, we need intelligence, all of us, especially in our neighborhoods and communities, because we have blind spots. There's a thing we call the fog of war. It came from a Prussian military strategist, a guy named Karl von Clausewitz. And he says, basically, 2/3 of the thing that we do in war are shrouded in the cloud. And that's where we get fog of war from. And I'm not talking about war fighting right now. I'm talking about navigating our ways through, or navigating ourselves through an emergency. Whether that's a tornado, we're facing looters, civil unrest, any other kind of violence. The bottom line on intelligence is, if your mission is to protect your community during an emergency, whether it's short-term or protracted, you risk mission failure without having real-time information or intelligence coming in. All right, anybody, what is the single greatest factor in decision-making? Anybody, just shout it out, what do you think? Information. Good answer. Yeah, that's right. We have this thing called the Boogaloo. And if you've been to a high-end tactical shooting course or anything like that, maybe your instructor talked about the Boogaloo. We observe what's happening, we orient ourselves to what's happening, we decide on what we're going to do in response, and then we act. And it was developed by a fighter pilot named Colonel John Boyd, who describes this universal human decision-making process. Well, we go one step up from the tactical level organizational or group level, where observe and orient is intelligence, and decide and act is operations. I don't want to get too technical. In the Army, we have the intelligence shop and we have the operations shop, or the operations guys. And our job in intelligence is to inform the operations guys about what's going on. What does it look like out there? What is this village, what does Musa Calais look like, this village in Afghanistan? What does it look like before we even put boots on the ground there? I mean, that's something we really want to know before we get there. So the question is, in an emergency, how are we going to observe or gather intelligence? And how are we going to orient ourselves or analyze that information so that we can decide and act? You don't decide and act if you can't observe and orient. Not very well, at least. You will risk mission failure if you can't. It's like getting into a boxing ring with a 13-year-old kid, but you're blindfolded. I'm not going to get up by a 13-year-old if I can't see where he is. That's just that. All right, so in an emergency or disaster, we're going to have one of two problems. Oh, that's how much time I have left? Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to have one of two problems. Number one, we're not going to have any information coming in. Here's a real world story. We work with a group called Cajun Navy Relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, Cajun Navy. And it's basically just a bunch of Cajuns and rednecks with boats and big trucks. And you've probably seen them on TV, especially here in Houston. We're right outside of Houston, we're in Harvey. And they'll go in and they'll rescue like single moms. On social media, after hurricane, there's always people like, oh, those idiots didn't get out of town. Well, if you're a poor single mom, you have 2 kids, you might not have money to go just get out of town on a whim. So luckily, Cajun Navy Relief, they're around, and they really did rescue single mothers and their children, a lot of elderly folks too, out of these floodwaters. Well, we help them with intelligence. So we scrape social media, all the people on their roofs or in waste people water on Twitter saying, help, I need help, we're in water, we need to be safe. Well, we scrape Twitter and Facebook and some other social media sites for that kind of information. We try to find these people who are posting on social media. We send that information out to the dispatch, and we get a boat team, a search and rescue team out there to help these people. Well, 2 or 3 days into this event, what do you think starts happening to cell phones and computer? That's right, it completely dries up. And all of a sudden, as we relying on social media so heavily, we were really at a great disadvantage once people's cell phones started to go down. There's just not much we can do. So that's problem number one. We're not going to have enough information to be as successful as we want to be. Or alternatively, there's going to be so much information coming in that we have information overload. And we're not going to be able to track down all this stuff. And it's just going to be, the information is going to be coming in so fast that we can't keep up. Those are 2 problems that I do not want to have in an emergency situation. Let's talk about Ferguson real quick, because this is really the first time where we proved this concept. So myself, a fellow intelligence analyst who was stationed in South Korea at the time, a handful of volunteers, we battle-tracked the Ferguson riots. And it was pretty interesting. We were doing our workup. I'd never been there before. We were doing our workup. We were studying the city, looking where the police stations are, looking where the shooting occurred, and trying to figure out where these protests were going to be. We're listening to the radio, and we kind of stumble our way into just a dream scenario, because typically you have local, state, and federal law enforcement coming in, and they're all operating on different channels. Well, they didn't have interoperability in communications, so most of them were transmitting in the clear on the same frequencies that we could listen into. And there was a call sign, a guy named Warfighter 33. It turns out was the National Guard commander who was on the scene there. And he starts telling his National Guard's troops to start pushing out to their static security locations. That's early morning. We got a 30-minute head start. 30 minutes before the no troop bill came out, we knew we got 30 minutes. Let's get everybody online. Let's start monitoring all these channels. Let's start pushing this flow of information in so we can battle track the situation. It's enough time to save someone's life to get out of there. Potentially, if my grandmother lived there, for instance. What we did is we had real-time information coming in. So we're listening to the police scanner. Depending on where you live, that may be a huge waste of time. Just because so many law enforcement agencies are going to encrypted channels where they put all the juicy stuff on their tactical channels and you can't hear that stuff. Other radio traffic, like ham radio operators, for instance, on VHF, UHF in the area, listening into that. Obviously, Twitter and Facebook got a lot of information from there. Cable and local news. We're about anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes ahead of what was coming out on Fox and CNN. So if you're relying on your local news crew to provide you breaking or early warning information, I just wouldn't bet my life on it. Because we pretty much proved, hey, look, 15 minutes may as well have been 1,000 years ago in some of these situations. Intelligence has a shelf life, especially when it's happening in real time. And then we had some human sources on the ground. We had some folks in law enforcement texting us kind of what was going on. And so what we did was we were backtracking the situation. By the way, this is something that just about anyone can play an active role in. We were mapping events out as they occurred. We visualized all this raw data. We produced real-time intelligence. So here's a map. There are these green pins down here. These are all the National Guard checkpoints. We saw a picture on Twitter, for instance, and we look at the store name or the street name in the background and find out where they were. Drop a pin. Drop a pin, drop a pin. And after 30 minutes, 60 minutes of doing this, we really got a very good picture of what the security situation looked like. This, by the way, is just done on Google Earth Pro, which is free. Here are some roadblocks that had been set up, these yellow pins here. A couple years later, we did the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, Ohio. And here's the green zone down here. That's where President Trump was. Not too concerned about security down there. But over here, this is the protest zone. And all of these red triangles were reports of protesters from a police scanner, from Twitter, from Facebook, wherever we got this information from. There were some armed protesters there at 14:48, 2:48 p.m. Armed protesters in that zone. They had AR-15s. And the communists, they have this very wide assortment of firearms. I don't think they really turned the curve on getting to where the right is in terms of having some commonality, really knowing what you're doing. But that's changing. There's a group, just briefly, there's a group called the Social Rifle Association, and back in March they had 3,000 members. Earlier this month they announced they had 7,000 members. They doubled in like 3 months. And those groups are proliferating. There's a wide array of those groups, by the way. Social Rifle Association has almost 90 chapters, including several here in Texas. So just briefly, kind of intelligence gathering. There's open source intelligence, so stuff we get off of social media. Open source is also meetings. If you go to your county commission meeting or your city hall meetings, that's open source. Anybody can go there and take notes on what these politicians are doing. The people making decisions, making laws and regulations about where you live, that's pretty high on my priority list here. I want to know what I'm getting myself into once the next crew takes over. Signals intelligence, listening to a police scanner is a very rudimentary form of SIGINT. Right? I mean, we're not like tracking cell phones in real time and stuff. We're not pulling metadata from all these people. Listening to a police scanner, if you have some ham radio guys, maybe some direction finding. A lot of these communist groups now, they're using like Baofeng radios, a lot like the prepper groups. And if it emits a signal, it can be tracked. Maybe there's some value to it. By the way, we'll do a Q&A, so if you have specific questions, we'll try to cover that. Imagery intelligence, Stuff like drones, really great. Maybe of limited usage, but if you live in a flooded area and you're trying to get out of a flooded area, obviously sending up a drone and looking for roads or bridges that are not underwater, maybe of some intelligence value to us. And then human intelligence, our friends and family and our network, all those sensors saying, I want to make, this is a really piece of important information. I want to make sure that my group knows about this. I want to make sure that the people on my community security team know this piece of information so that we can make better decisions. Because the better we observe and orient, the better we can decide and act. And the better we decide and act, the better situations we're going to put ourselves in, the more problems we're going to be able to avoid, hopefully. Let's talk about the area study. A lot of people say, well, Sam, what should we be preparing for? Should we be preparing for an EMP from North Korea? And I would say, probably not. Just frankly. I'm way more concerned about this tornado, this next hurricane that's going to come through my community. The fact of the matter is, we're really not preparing for a financial collapse or a societal collapse. We're preparing for the second and third and fourth and fifth order effects of those things. If there's a stock market crash tomorrow, it's not going to kill me, but it's going to make a lot of people angry in my neighborhood. That's what I actually need to be preparing for. My neighbors, I need to be preparing for how they react to that. So when we do an area study, by the way, I recommend everyone do an area study. You can do a county-wide area study and get really granular and do one for your cul-de-sac or your subdivision, whatever. Let's figure out what can break. We want to know what to prepare for. Power outages, ice storms, maybe protests. I have this long list. Don't worry about trying to write all this stuff down. I'm going to make this super easy for you. I'll give you some information before we leave. I'll give you a place where you can find some information. This is what we call an operating environment. This is the things around us that move, or in some cases that don't move, that could affect us. And let's look at what those things are. There's six layers of our operating environment. When talking about emergency preparedness, we want to find out what can break or what can go wrong on each of these layers. So number one, physical terrain. By the way, let me just say this. Lots of people, if this is you, understand, I'm not trying to. They have seven years worth of food and water stored up in their basement, and they don't know who their neighbors are. Maybe stop collecting food past 12 months and just go around and meet the neighbors. That in terms of being prepared, you need that sensors, right? You might find a guy next to you has 7 years worth of food too. And then guess what? And then you have what's called forced multiplication. All of a sudden, you're not just one father or family, now you're two fathers and two families who can team together. So if you're not doing that, I would recommend you do that. You can start a neighborhood watch. I think that's a fantastic first way to do that. So first is the physical terrain. Are we at risk of flooding? Well, let's pull up these FEMA flood maps. In Austin, we have a lot of flash flooding. And so I can't get out of my neighborhood when there's more than, 5 or 6 inches of rain that come down within a few hours. Well, okay, I have to have a canoe. But that's one thing that I need to recognize, I need to prepare for. I may be stuck in my neighborhood if we have a lot of rain, like a hurricane. Next is looking at the human terrain. Who lives around us? Do you have they're called fuzzbusters and some other things. You have they're newspapers. Sometimes they're like $1. You get them at a convenience store. And it's the police blotter, basically. It has all the mug shots of all the people who've been arrested in your area. I get one of those, I think it comes out like once a month or once every 2 weeks. And I get one and I'll just flip through there and say, what kind of crime is going on in my neighborhood? APD has a website, if you can get on there. And there's a crime map. they'll show all the crimes that happened. You may have something similar up here. There's a few caveats that we need to understand about that. Number one is all those dots on the map are probably not the exact location where those crimes happened. Number two, a lot of times, much more heinous attacks, they'll just be all assaults. Everything is an assault, regardless of what type it was. A few years ago, in Birmingham, Alabama, there was a police chief by the name of A.C. Roper. Police Chief Roper came out and said, "I'm proud to announce that Birmingham has had their murder rate drop by 20% this year." And everyone freaks out because it really is literally unbelievable. And it was unbelievable. What had happened was, UAB Hospital, University of Alabama at Birmingham, got some new cutting edge medical equipment in. And what happened was, they were able to save more would-be murder victims. So it's not that the murder rate went down. It's that the murders went down because doctors were able to save 20% more lives. So Birmingham was literally no safer than it was the day before. But the murder rate was lower, so keep that in mind. Statistics maybe only telling us part of the truth. And then your area may not report that stuff, may not report those types of information. Sometimes newspapers will, but if you're concerned about crime in the area, it's important to identify your baseline. What's an average week or what's an average month in your neighborhood look like? Is the week or the month later, is it worse? And the month after that, is it worse? And that's something that if you're really concerned about emergency preparedness, that's probably one thing we should be taking a look at. Obviously, if you live near a university, you'll have two things for sure: drugs and communists. You have drugs because all the college students there, which means you have drug gangs or drug pushers there. That's something that I would like to know about. And also you have communist professors, so you're going to have communist students. Next is critical infrastructure. Let's figure out what can break. Where do we get our water? Where do we get our power? Raise your hand if you think Walmart or Target is critical infrastructure. Yeah, for sure. For sure it is. It has all this cheap stuff from China that we really live on day to day. If I live near any type of natural resources, if I live near a Walmart, basically any place that could be looted, I want to make sure and put that on my map. Hey, if something bad happens, avoid this part of the neighborhood or avoid this part of the city. It's a no-go zone before an emergency. It's definitely a no-go zone after. All right, next is politics and governance. How's our sheriff? What does our sheriff think about the Bill of Rights, about the Second Amendment, about the Fourth Amendment? Who are the people that make our rules for us? There's one thing I would advise everyone to do. Thank you. Maybe not everybody, but a few of you at least do. I'll get together as a group and decide who's going to do this. There are websites like meetup.com and a lot of political organizations and social clubs and stuff. They'll put their meetings on that page. And I don't know, Travis County Socialists might be a monthly meeting I would want to at least to hear what they're talking about. And a lot of these places, you can just show up and they'll literally have their meeting and you can just listen to it. Especially on college campuses, find some, maybe send someone to the meeting if you can. Next is law enforcement, military, and security. There's a website, I think it's called rate.com, like R-A-T-E, and that people will go on there and they'll file complaints against police officers or against the police department. And it's interesting just to get on there and see what people are complaining about. And maybe it's illegitimate, maybe it's real stuff. I don't know. You have to decide that for yourself. It's your neighborhood. But that's one thing I would look at. Kind of the flip side of law enforcement is what kind of anti-law enforcement elements you have in your area. Several years ago, I teach a lot of prepper groups and people who are interested in emergency preparedness. And several years ago, I was teaching a class in Tennessee, and it's a private class. I get there on Friday afternoon, and I meet with the group leaders there, and I say, tell me what you're concerned about. I'm going to teach this class for you. Tell me what you're concerned about. And this is back during the president, who will not be named. And they said, we're afraid he's going to take our guns. Now, I'm going back to that year. I can see it. I was concerned about that myself. But I said, let's look into this. Let's see if that's really going to be your biggest threat. And I said, well, what's your critical infrastructure in your county? What kind of critical infrastructure do you have? And they had one power substation. There's nothing of strategic value there. In other words, why is the Department of Defense going to send armed anybody to your county to guard a power substation? They're not. So the chances that you're going to have an armed federal presence in your county, pretty darn low. Not only that, you're a very rural county, in a very rural part of the county. In other words, nobody's going to be coming door to door to take your guns. I said, well, let's look at law enforcement, or let's look at military. By the way, I think they had one sheriff's deputy for every 36 miles of highway in that county. One deputy for every 36 miles. So you're not going to have 10 deputies, beating down every door in your neighborhood and steal your guns. Sorry. Well, let's look at military. What do you have? Okay, no active military, no regular army, anything like that. Like 60 plus miles away, they had a National Guard armory. And they said, well, the National Guard can take our guns. I said, well, let's look at what kind of troops are there. It's a transportation company. Okay, truck drivers. These guys are water purification specialists, i.e., not the dudes that are going to come kick down your door to take your grandpa's shotgun or whatever you have there. And so really in about 15 minutes, I kind of said, you know what? Our biggest threat is not actually DHS coming after us. Our biggest threat is going to be the tweakers up in the hills breaking into our cars to steal whatever we've left in there overnight. And in emergency situations, there's going to be a lot of hungry tweakers who are out to get whatever they can. And so they had this very rapid paradigm shift. Just by looking at some few basic facts, the things that they were preparing for just radically change. And that's what intelligence can do for us, really. That's what a systematic, methodical process to information and evidence can do for us. It will tell us exactly what we should be preparing for. The goal of intelligence is to reduce uncertainty about the future. There's a lot of uncertainty about the future right now. The great thing is that intelligence can inform us of what is more likely and what is less likely to occur. And then finally, economics and finance. Who are the major employers in your area? What's the unemployment rate? What are home values looking like? If you're, the three, well, we won't necessarily go into that, but basically we're looking for early morning. Is Walmart going to start laying off people? Or is your, I don't know, what's a big industry up here, up this way? Oh, perfect, yeah. Okay, that's great. So all of a sudden, American Airlines is saying they're going to continue to cut flights so there's more people out of work. And maybe that's in your neighborhood. And what are the second and third order effects of that? So these are the 6 layers of our operating environment. This is the kind of information we need to be putting into our area studies. And what we can find out from these 6 layers, that's going to tell us exactly what we should be preparing for. Like real world stuff, not Chinese parachute infantry jumping out of the sky into Tanner County at Red Dawn. I guess they made those North Koreans or something, didn't they, in the remake? Well, whoever. Nobody's jumping out of the sky. After we look at all the elements of our operating environment, next we need to look at threats, known, suspected, or potential threats. And there are 4 threat categories. What I advise you do is when you go home, meet up with your family or your neighbors, or maybe you have a neighborhood watch, or maybe you're a member of a preparedness group, sit down and write these out. We have conventional, irregular, catastrophic, and disruptive. I'm going to pull a marker in here real quick. Stand by. Wasn't that marker review? Yeah. All right, conventional threats. Those are things like a standing army, like in Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. Army was a conventional threat to terrorist or insurgent groups. They're typically uniformed. They have de jure authority, like they are the legal authority. Opposite of that, we have irregular threats. These are things like mobs, gang members, looters, common criminals. If we do have a dollar crash, like, guys, seriously, I know a lot of people are saying this, but this actually concerns me greatly. You know, obviously, we're not going to wake up the day after the election, and we're not going to know who's president. The 2000 election was not decided until December the 13th, 12th or 13th. And the problem is, with today's social and political climate, all these agitators, they're going to have an entire month, potentially. They'll have weeks or maybe a month or longer to agitate. This is an irregular threat. Let me just tell you what they're already planning on doing. Last year, they started circling a pamphlet talking about all the ports in the United States and how all these ports are unionized. And basically, they're trying to organize all these port workers to have a general strike. They've been pushing a general strike if President Trump wins. And they want to shut down all the ports. They want to shut down all trade. That's not just ports. That's any type of union services. So maybe railways will be affected. Maybe lots of things will be affected. And they really do want to grind the economy down to a halt and foment some kind of like, you know, Euromaidan or Tahrir Square-like resistance or rebellion. You know, Euromaidan happened in Kiev, Ukraine. You know, they all rushed out to the streets, and eventually Yanukovych, I think, was the one that they ousted, called the Maidan. Tahrir Square in Egypt, the Arab Spring in 2011, they kicked him out. Just by a mass of people. This is exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to do this back during the impeachment. They basically were saying, like Charles Blow and Michelle Goldberg, and I read the New York Times for you, so you don't have to. But they're all these opinion and columnists were talking about this. It's going to take millions of us to get out into the streets and shut this country down until Trump leaves. And it obviously didn't happen during the impeachment. I think it's going to happen in November if he wins, or in December if he wins. It's probably going to happen shortly after election day if they think he's going to win. In terms of what that does to the dollar and what that does to a lot of things, I'm greatly concerned. So those are irregular threats. Could also be catastrophic and destructive threats. Okay, catastrophic threats are things like tornadoes and flooding or hurricanes, potentially, mass casualty types of events. Do you have earthquakes here? Not really, a little bit, yeah. What are your biggest catastrophic threats over there, like natural disasters? Tornadoes, yeah. I feel bad for the people who live on the outskirts of Houston, because every time there's a hurricane, their towns double, like 50,000 to 100,000 in 36 hours. That can be a disruptive threat. So disruptive threats are things like maybe there's an internet outage, maybe there's a power outage. They're not going to kill us, but they are going to disrupt our operations. They're going to disrupt our security. On each level, in our area study, if we really want to get into preparedness, we need to start looking at our area fault lines. So do you have political fault lines here? Do you have political extremist groups? By the way, you do, obviously. It's not just the far left. It's not just the anarchists and revolutionary communists that concern me, although they do. But there's this fringe element, and I hesitate to even call these people far right, but that's just becoming popular nomenclature for them. Raise your hand if you've heard of a concept called accelerationism before. So there are accelerationists, and they want to, they really do, their intent is to kickstart an armed conflict, a real, in earnest civil war. And they say, and they talk about this on Telegram, they talk about this in a lot of places, and I think they're serious about this. It had occurred to me that maybe it's just someone at the FBI saying, hey guys, let's go do this. And then they just start arresting people who say, man, that's a great idea. But I actually think this is legitimate. They want to attack the power grids to the cities because they say all these leftists, they live in the cities. They live on the East Coast and they live on the West Coast. And if we just bring down the power grid, by the way, I'm not trying to talk about extreme things, but I'm telling you this is exactly the stuff they're talking about. And they say, well, if we just take down the power grid, all of a sudden these people are not a political problem anymore. They're no longer a problem for this country. All that will be left are the red states, and we'll figure out how to, make our way back. And I think it's just absolutely bonkers. But they're serious about it. So I'm just saying there's a lot of things that make me interested in preparedness. So those are potential fault lines, vulnerabilities. Obviously, one vulnerability or limitation might be cutting police budgets. Is Dallas talking about doing that, cutting police budgets? No, they are in Austin. And actually, APD, they're mostly pretty decent guys and gals in Austin. The police aren't. So we want to start looking at these fault lines, vulnerabilities, limitations. Again, once we start picking these out, now we can start looking at second and third order effects and really determine what we should be preparing for. All right, this is the last thing that I'll talk about. Feel free to take a picture of this if you want. I'll make sure everyone gets it if they want. There's 5 steps, right? A lot of people, their approach to preparedness is, all right, let's just go to Sam's or Costco. Let's just go spend $1,500 on rice and beans. And let's go buy 17 AR-15s and 10,000 rounds of ammo and stick it in the basement or in the safe or back behind my wife's dresses in the closet. We're going to be good. We're going to, that whole thing they say, don't survive, thrive. All right, well, let's not do that. Let's take a methodical approach to this. So number 1 is develop a range of potential scenarios. Write out either 5 or 10 things, how many other things concerning you. Write out all those scenarios. And then start thinking, well, what do we need to do in this scenario? What do we do in this scenario? By the way, this is basically called rehearsal, essentially, form of rehearsal, which is something that the guys in special operations do a lot. And if they're doing it a lot, I want to make sure I do it a lot too. We don't have time to break all this stuff down, but identify your mission, right? What's your outcome? What's your end goal in each of these scenarios? Maybe it's to bug out, right? Oh, I want to get to my cabin in the woods that's 10 hours away. Good luck. Identify your mission. And then based on what you want the outcome to be, now identify your needs. Look at your priorities. What items do you need to buy? What skills do you need to develop? What nodes of your network do you need to build? Who are the people that are going to help facilitate this successful mission? Especially skills. What skills do you need to develop? Number 4, develop early warning. If a scenario is developing, I want to know that it's developing, not that it has developed, because then I don't have any extra time. And then number 5, scan, monitor, and collect. This really is a group process. Intelligence is a team sport. The more sensors we have, the more information we have coming in, the more we're scanning and monitoring, the more we're collecting. And if we do all 5 things on this list here, we're going to be in a pretty darn good situation compared to our peers who are not doing these things. This is my approach to preparedness. I think it makes the most amount of sense to me. And before we get into some questions, because I think we're pretty close to have them wrap up here. Again, my name is Sam Culper. On the website, you can go to forwardserver.com. I do a almost daily podcast called Out Front with Sam Culper. It's on iTunes and Google and all those other places. I have a YouTube channel as well. You can just search Ford Observer. You'll find it. And then if you want to email me, you can do that too. Here's my email address. So I guess with that, I don't know how much time we have. I'll take questions, or I don't know what the plan is. I'll let the boss figure that out.
Am I the boss? Sweet. Okay. A couple things I want to say real quick before we go into Q&A, and we are going to do Q&A. So it is 8 o'clock, and if you need to get out of here, nobody's going to be offended if you get up and leave, but I want to do about 15 minutes of Q&A still. But I also want to mention that it was the first speaker that we had up here, we never really talked about who they are or how you can get a hold of them, and they offered some training services and such. It's Texas Defense Force. So it's txdf.org, okay? And they donated that gun that we just auctioned off. So if we could thank them, that would be great. Okay, also, we are going to start passing around some clipboards. Jason, Fred, who else has got this? Okay, so watch for this. I think they're going to be coming from all around the room. But for those who are interested in connecting with other patriots, this presentation interested you want to pursue it further, we're going to start doing a little bit more community organizing. So that's what that clipboard is about. We're going to have some time at the range for all levels of people that want to get trained on self-defense, I guess is how we put that. But more than that, we have a lot of plans. And so if you want to be a part of that, just sign up on the clipboard and we'll reach out to you. But now let's go ahead and do some Q&A. So if you have a question, I'm just going to ask you to speak it really loudly, and if you'll repeat the question for people watching online. Oh, never mind. Fran has a mic. So, Fran, if you want to walk around with the mic.
I think there's some questions in the back.
You put up the site map, and it had a diagram that looked like a dot, the Texas in the DFW area.
Yes.
I'll repeat that. You put up the site map, and you had a diamond in North Texas that looked like the DFW metro area. Can you drill down a little bit deeper into that and tell us why the diamond came there, and if that is DFW?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the national situation map. These places with red diamonds, we actually made this off heat map. So what we did is we took a lot of our reporting and police reporting, and all these red diamonds have an elevated, they basically have the most amount of armed leftist activity. Either that or there really is an insurgency that's being built there. Phase number 1 of the insurgency is latent and incipient phase. It's recruiting and organizing, and building out the competing institutions like the Chaz. Chaz is a really good indicator of that. Stuff that's going on in Portland right now. Very good, lots of indicators there. So yeah, up in Dallas, you got a bunch of knuckleheads up here. Down, basically, between Austin and San Antonio, we have a lot of these guys too. We have, armed revolutionary communist groups in Austin. It's like half the city now. And in Houston, you have a lot of those groups too, or you have a few of those groups rather. But yeah, really, Dallas and Austin is hot spots for the state of Texas. Yes, sir.
Yes, over the last couple of months, I've been seeing a lot of civil unrest, and I've been interested in self-defense tactics. And I've recently become aware of a tactic where you can just if you're on top of somebody and you kneel on their neck, and they'll be dead just in a couple seconds. Is that a technical thing?
Yeah, if you want riots and the stuff we've been seeing for the past 3 months, yeah, real effective. Next question.
Who else has a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, yes, I have a question. So if there was a tornado and we lose internet access, all that kind of stuff. How can we, or should we start gathering maps, learning our highways and streets? What do you recommend?
Yeah, maps are an absolute essential. You know, you can be as, I guess, as cheap as just screenshotting. Basically, we want 3 kinds of maps, right? We want a topographic map that shows terrain. We want a street map like we can get off of Google Maps. And we want an imagery map. So we can do all 3 of those things on like Google Maps or Google Earth. And just screenshot that stuff and print it out. We can go to Kinko's, I think about $7. You can go laminate, print out like an 11 by 17 map and get it laminated for about $7, at least where I live. And yeah, I would definitely do that. You could also go to mytopo.com. I have no interest whatsoever in this company. They just print off a lot of good maps. But if you go to mytopo.com and get maps printed off there too. And yeah, if we do find ourselves in a situation where we actually do have to update a map, we're in a protracted emergency, and every time we get reports of looters, we want to do this on an overlay, just a clear sheet of plastic. I can give you more information too on how to do this, but yeah, we want to draw something on the map, like a red diamond or a red triangle, and write, looting on there. And over time, we can kind of build out a security picture of what our area is looking like. So yeah, definitely get maps. I hope that answers your question. Yes, sir.
So yes, based on the intelligence that you gathered in these hotspots, what have you found out in terms of who is organizing, masterminding, and financing these communist organizations?
Yeah, there's a very interesting group called Momentum. And Momentum is behind a lot of these community organizing and far leftist groups. Obviously, George Soros gives money to these people, to these groups. It's not like the head of the Austin Red Guards calls up George Soros and is like, hey, George, hit me up, bro. George Soros gives money to organizations and then just starts to trickle out to all these groups. And he's not the only one. And actually, what's Bezos' ex-wife? Mackenzie Bezos. Just gave away $1.7 billion to a lot of these leftist groups. I'm not saying it's winding up in the pockets of the crust punks in Austin who are the anarchists. But they are certainly, in some ways, beneficiaries of that. Next question. I'll get to you next. Yes, sir.
So it's very important, obviously, communication if you're going to build a neighborhood watch, as you were talking about. And my husband and I are actually doing it now. We've had several people reach out to us. But the key is, can you recommend any communication platforms that provide the greatest security? Like we use Signal as one of them because it's encrypted both ways, sending and receiving. Are there any others you could recommend that are as good or better?
Yeah, sure. Typically when we talk about communications or transportation, we want to memorize an acronym called PACE, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. So yeah, if I just want a text message on Signal, I like the Signal app. It does provide us some level of security. I would not bet my life on Signal. If we want to talk about radios, the number of radios that have some built-in security features. One of them is made by Motorola, the Motorola DTR 550 or 650, and that has frequency hopping. So I have a radio that I press the button and it will find the closest, basically the strongest signal. So if you're out there on your battlefield walkie-talkies in my neighborhood, I'm going to be able to hit that close call button and listen into your conversation, because all that stuff's just transmitted and clear. Well, these Motorola frequency hopping, the DTR 550s and DTR 650s, they'll frequency hop. So they'll jump frequencies every 20 or 50 times a second or something like that. And even if I found that frequency, it would change so many times, I wouldn't even get a blip out of it. So that's one secure radio. That's not for long distance communication, but in and around your neighborhood, that's a good alternative. One problem we face, especially with iPhones, is if your platform is not secure, whatever app you run on it may not be secure. But in terms of just, I want to keep information away from somebody in the neighborhood, or I don't want certain prying eyes to. I don't want to be transmitting this stuff in the clear. Yeah, that's the way to go.
Okay. So this might not be the right question to ask, but so there was during the protests or whatever, like a bunch of piles of bricks being shown. Is that something that?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you say it one time?
I'm talking about like the piles of bricks that were found.
Oh, piles of bricks. Okay, yeah.
And how is that something legitimate, and is that relative to?
Yeah, that's super interesting. They call it a conspiracy theory. That'll make me a conspiracy theorist because I actually do. Some of those may have been from construction sites, but I've heard from people who work in those areas, and they say there's no construction going on. It's not just like some construction crew came and dropped a load of 500 bricks on the street corner for the heck of it, I actually think that was planned. I mean, I think that was deliberate, in other words. I do, that's my professional opinion, based on people who told me things people I trust. I think we're up here somewhere. Hope that answers your question. Yes.
You were talking about the groups that would do an insurgency if the election doesn't turn out the way they want. And then you were talking about the radical violence between people.
Mm-hmm.
So if we all, millions go to the street after the election, what will the military do? What will
Well, it depends. Probably depends who's in charge of it. I don't know. That's a good question. I know a lot of people say, well, the military is split into two, or 2/3 of the military voted for Trump, so they're going to split away. Some general somewhere is going to be the. I don't know. Yeah, frankly, it would be very difficult for me to see, like a collection of colonels and generals just say, hey, we're done here. We'd have to be in really bad shape, I think, for that to happen. I don't think let me just say this. My baseline expectation is that the military doesn't fall apart. We don't have any rogue colonels and generals taking all the tanks in the armory and, driving down Pennsylvania Avenue or whatever. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know if that answers the question or not. What does the military do? I think, probably keep preparing for a war with China or Russia, frankly.
Yes, my question is, I'm sorry, but I missed the entire presentation. Got here late.
Didn't miss much.
I don't know if you may have covered this, but we're going cashless, right? And we know that this coin shortage is fake, and that's just preparing the mind. So we'll accept the currency. We know that there's 32 bills, I believe, right now on the floor of Congress to go crypto, right? That's already set up. Different topic, and there is a guy on YouTube named Rob Braxman Tech, and he was a white hat hacker that worked for the banks, and now he works for the people, and he knows that this all of our surveillance from Google and Facebook, those are the two number one privacy.
Sorry, getting off you. Is there a question? There's lots of questions where we don't talk. Is there a question? And I'm not trying to be rude. I'm really not. I'm just trying to get to questions. Yes, sir.
You said there were 70 socialist gun clubs, I'm going to call them. Who leads those? Who heads them up? And who is monitoring them to see what they're up to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there's 87 chapters of the Socialist Rifle Association. And nationally, they have about 7,000 members. Who leads these groups? Good question. There are some veterans. You remember a dude named Spencer Rapone from several years ago? He was an Army Ranger, enlisted. gets out, goes to West Point. And he, on graduation day, he takes off his cover, his hat, and on the inside, on the top says, "Communism will win." And he unbuttons his uniform, and he has a t-shirt of Che Guevara underneath. There are communists who have military experience. In most cases, the members of these groups don't. And in most cases, these guys can't tell you the difference between a 5.56 and a 308. But in some cases, these guys, they do have combat experience, either in the Army or the Marine Corps. They went to Iraq or Afghanistan, or they went to Kurdistan, they went to Rojava, and they fought with the Kurds, or they fought with the YPG, or the Syrian Defense Force against the Islamic State. And although they didn't enlist, they never served, they really do have some legitimate combat bona fides with fighting with the Peshmerga, or whatever Kurd group that they were embedded with. That's mainly out in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle and Portland, but they are kind of exporting that training, we call it exporting TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. That stuff is getting out. Another thing that they're doing is they're going in and reading Army manuals, like this Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club, which is in Seattle area, Washington State. One of the members was picking through the U.S. Army and Marine Corps counterinsurgency manual, and they were basically learning more about how to wage an insurgency by learning about how the Army and Marine Corps were trying to fight insurgency. So they are studying doctrine on a very low level. Most of them lack a frame of reference to really understand what they're reading on a cursory level, but they are trying. So I hope that answers your question.
So are you concerned about what's going on in Portland and Seattle spreading?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
How soon?
If Trump wins, November 4th, probably before. Did you guys see that thing? I'm not sure. I just saw it the other day. I'm not sure how much I want to put into this yet. But September 17th, I think they said like 50 days before the election, they want to do a siege on the White House. And I don't know if that's some 4chan Photoshop thing or not, but I haven't really looked into it yet. But on Wednesday, I'll be back in the office and we'll be tracking that. So maybe as soon as September 17th at the White House.
They wanted to see a what?
A siege. So they call it a siege on the White House. Yeah, it's basically not a version of Occupy. Next, yes. Hope that answers your question. I think there's a question in the back for sure.
We're going to take one more question.
All right, let's get the blue shirt.
I was going to ask you about community prepping and how to get started if you're already a prepper.
Well, I'd say probably number one, start a neighborhood watch. Something we've done is we're trying to build a multi-county preparedness network. And I'm not a huge fan of doing this stuff on Facebook, but just in general, to get started, you can do something as easily as making a group or a page on Facebook, and just inviting people. And again, maybe that's not the best way. I really hate doing this stuff on Facebook. But you have to try to get yourselves out there. One way is go by your local gun shops and just start chatting those dudes up and say, hey, have you heard anything about the anarchist gun in Dallas or Fort Worth or wherever? And start a conversation. See where that conversation leads. Actively listen. Nod your head. Feign surprise. And get them really talking about what they believe and stuff. And then you're basically judging receptiveness at that point. And then you can say, hey, by the way, I have a prepper group. You guys should come down. So I hope that answers your question. I think it's a really good way to start.
Okay, let's finish up here. Sometimes when we're looking for a speaker on a specific topic, they can write well, but that doesn't mean they speak well.